let me tell you, it has been a day. It has been a day. Welcome to the Nutmeg Tavern. We are here in the virtual tavern. There's actually this time vortex between me and you, but we've got some technology. We're going to try to break through the barrier a little bit today, but it has been a very exciting week here at Townsends with all that's going on. We continue to process orders and do all that good stuff, but with almost no staff whatsoever. So almost all the Townsends folks are working hard at home, and so the regular work still has to happen here, and so everybody's running twice as fast that's left here. So, and that means I get to process orders and good stuff. I'm your host, John Townsend. We're going to be talking about history stuff, and we got some special guests today, and the guy behind the time vortex way over there,
yeah,
is Ryan.
Hey guys, it's good to see you. Good to be here today.
Now, if things look different, and well, it's because we're experimenting. You know, well, why, when you already have twice as much work to do, why not just add a little bit more? So that's what we're doing. I hope you've enjoyed, even while all these other things are going on, the new videos that we put out, like yesterday's video. It was supposed to go out on Wednesday, but I made it too complicated, so it had to go out on Thursday. One of those really interesting topics. I love that idea that that connection that everyone who ends up coming to the new world from the old world has to go through this sort of rite of passage, right? This no fun ship ride. Even for people that are, you know, well-to-do, they still have a difficult time. So such a very interesting connection. And that idea of just, you know, what would it be like if you were, you know, walking into a brand new world and you had to, you know, find new friends, you had to find a new job, you had to deal with, you know, who knows what sort of difficulties, and that connection that we have with what seems like our world sort of shifting, changing, you know, crumbling in front of us. We don't know what's going to happen. We're thrown into, you know, confusion, but nothing new, right? Nothing new. Got some lots of fun stuff. We're going to talk today. Special guests in just about 5 minutes or so. Before we get there, I have just this overwhelming number of people that are. You all right? He's looking funny over there. I'm looking through the time vortex, trying to wonder why.
I'm just wondering what I was hearing something weird, but I think I isolated it.
That was you.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
Anyway. There's been a tremendous outpouring of help here. People wanting to help support what we do on the channel via Patreon and other ways. There's so many names that I'm going to, again, this week, cut the Patreon thing in half, so they'll do one part now and another part toward the end. Remind me, Ryan, if I forget, as we get toward the end. Let me draw a line. Boop. So Patreon's one of those ways that people support us with just this small amount of money per month. $1, $2, $5, whatever. Some people even a little bit more who want to help us out. And that's one of those, it's like how, you know, people want to know how they can give back to the channel. This is one of the ways they can do that. Julian Corbett, Terry Izali, Colin Kelly, Bruce Willis. Welcome, Bruce Willis. Adam Kral. It's hard for me to see in this light. Nathan Cole, Rachel Miller, Nathan Kirk, Adam McKinney, and Mavic Conrad. That's just half of the names. Such a, you know, tremendous way of helping us out, and I'm so thankful for people that do that. Also, want to reach out and say, if she's in the audience today, happy birthday to Luna.
Happy birthday, Luna.
Happy birthday, Luna. Or upcoming birthday, or whatever that is. What do you think, Ryan?
I think it's time. Let's say hi.
Time. Okay, here we go. Let's try it out. Is it working? What do you think, Ryan? Yes, there they are.
There they are.
Frank and Carol.
Can you guys hear us okay?
So one of the things that, so Frank, you do a traveling minister in that time period, right?
That's correct. That's the thing that got us started.
And Maggie does both the indentured servant and then post indentured servitude, right?
Right, indeed. And we also have about a couple of ne'er-do-wells that tag along with us occasionally that do a little body snatching on the side.
Yeah. So, give us the 3-minute rundown on.
Hey, we got it. We have audio.
It's fixed. All right.
We've had audio the whole time, Ryan. It's okay. It's okay.
The chat just changed. They can hear it now.
Okay.
YouTube couldn't hear it before.
All right.
Okay. Good.
Oh, thank you, YouTube, for your patience. You guys are wonderful.
Well, you've got a good audience that are very, very patient.
All right, I'm gonna stay quiet now. You guys go for it.
Carol, tell me about the 3-minute rundown on body snatching, because it's just a great story.
Been studying the background of the resurrectionists, is what we're called here. We had a lot of other names. Came over from England, Ireland, Scotland, that area, and we were the ones that were supplying the medical schools and the private doctors with cadavers in order to be able to do their dissection and teach their anatomy classes. It was against the law here for them to have bodies to work on other than murderers that have been hung, and that was part of the murder charge or punishment, was that you had to be dissected. And so it made it very difficult for the medical schools to grow. And they turned to wonderful people like myself and my fellows. And we worked in groups of 2 or 3 and would go out and collect fresh buried bodies at night in order to be able to make money off of it. It was a good living.
Now the parson isn't doing this. But I'm curious because Maggie comes by every now and again and asks me if anybody is ill in the parish.
Yeah, exactly.
As if she's looking for leads, as it were.
But it was a viable occupation and worked on by both men and women.
One of those kinds of stories that we just, I don't know, we kind of put that one away. We don't necessarily want to hear about it, but it is something that is an important part of kind of understanding what people thought about, and there were different customs, different kind of cultures about what they thought about dead bodies and whether they mattered or didn't matter. And so there's some really interesting kind of places you can go with that and the legalities of that, and then how that connects with things today and how that's changed our thought processes. So I very, very interesting story. But we want to talk about the poor and paupers and how that's dealt with both here in North America, how that's dealt with in Great Britain. And we've got this kind of long time stretch, don't we? When we study our time period, it's actually, we kind of look at things even more than 100 years, what's happening in the late 17th century, what's happening in the 18th century. And then, of course, it continues to be an important thing that's going on and interesting to study way up into the mid-19th century, kind of stays the same and slowly changes. So what are some of the most kind of sticks out, sore thumb, interesting things that you have discovered as you've studied this particular topic?
Well, I'd always heard of almshouses, poorhouses. In fact, where we live right now, the poor farm is just down the road and around the corner. Of course, it's not in operation anymore. And I just always had assumed that the poor were taken care of on an in-house level. I didn't realize that there was a period of time that there was no almshouse or poorhouses, and that the bulk of the poor people were taken care of somewhat in the way that we, they called it outdoor relief. And they literally paid people in the community to take you in and keep you for a year at a time. And they got paid weekly, a certain amount of money to feed you and provide for you. And that they could, if you were capable of working, they could use you through that period of time to work as though you were an indentured servant. And I thought that was not at all what I had ever thought that was. Kind of stood out.
We might have a town meeting, and at the end of the town meeting, after we've done the business, then we would bring in the paupers and auction them off to the lowest bidder. So whoever we could place this person with for a year for the least amount of outgo from the town's money, then they would have them, and they would be able to use them for, as labor, whatever, for that year. So we would say, here's Maggie, and we want who will give me 25 cents a month or a week to take care of her, and that's how it would go.
And if you had a relative, they would go to the relatives first. And if the relatives were willing but financially unable, then the relatives got paid to keep their mother, father, sister, brother, anything like that, if they could prove that they needed help doing that.
So that's one of the biggest surprises that we've run into, or one of them.
One of them, yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like there was a lot of flexibility, either within the local governments as they were dealing with that, or over time period as it changed, because it seemed like there's indoor, there's, okay, we're going to take these people into a building, we're going to, take care of them there. There's, we're going to farm them out, sort of that outside help. There seems to be other kinds of help where they would spend money to build a house for somebody who doesn't have enough, you can't afford to have. And it is like that's the best way to deal with it, or even just kind of small levels of help to people. Oh, we're going to buy them this little bit of food. So obviously the magistrates in this circumstance that are dealing with supporting the poor are coming up with different ways of doing it. And as that changes over time, it makes it a very complex thing to sort of study.
It really does, because it changes from place to place and town to town. It depended, too, on whether the colony was based as a religious colony and the church had a great deal of power in there, the Church of England, of course, being before we became a nation, or whether the church never got a foothold and it was the government who had a hold of it. Completely changes how the counties or the towns look at the poor and how they are what they're willing to do for them. In the Northeast, you see a lot more of them providing, like you said, some kind of service to help them rather than to give them money. They buy them enough wood to see them through the winter, or they provide food for them, so much food per this much time, and not as much money. You don't see money being handed out very easily. You see that a lot more on the outdoor relief, where they're actually paying someone to keep you. But if you can survive on your own, if you have a place to stay and you just need help maintaining that, they were more apt to give you the goods or the needs of whatever you needed to get through.
And you see this changing a lot because they're always looking for the least expensive way to take care of the problem.
So what about this? There's another idea, and that is to come up with a system of dealing with the poor. You have one of the ways that you think the most appropriate way to deal with them has to do with why you think people are poor. And there's the individuals, why I think this person is poor, and then there's the sort of larger philosophical concept of why are people poor, and what are your thoughts about that?
That's another thing that completely changes from place to place. And the attitude toward the poor, like we were talking a little while ago, around 1750, 1760, starts to make a change from compassion. And there's still compassion for the poor, but there becomes a lot more suspicion that people are poor because they're playing the system, because they're lazy and they don't want to. They don't want to work, but they're totally capable of working. And they begin to break people into two different categories. And you have the worthy poor who deserve help because they're infirmed, or they're mentally deranged, or they're physically inept, or they are young widows with young children whose husbands have died or deserted them, and they cannot work, and so they become the worthies. And then you have the unworthies, who are people that they think are doing this on purpose, or they have some type of, like, they talk a lot about debauchery, that people are drunkards and that they can't get away from gin in order to be able to do that.
Questions? So we also have to kind of remember about all the different kinds of people that have been brought into or have come into North America in this time period that we're thinking about, 18th century, early 19th century, and the various different cultures that are coming in from Europe. We kind of maybe think, maybe somebody looks at North America as they're just people, they're pioneers, they're fleeing religious oppression or something, and they're coming into the New World. But there are 1,000 different stories about why people are coming, and some of those people that are coming, maybe they've got completely different ideas, like, hey, it's a new place to, work the system, or maybe you got thoughts about that?
Yeah, of course, I study the Irish, being Irish myself, and there are several references to the fact that that as a culture, we didn't see a lot of difference between selling on the streets and begging. To them, it was about the same, about the same level. And of course, begging was against the law, not only in Great Britain, but here. And so that would have been something that would have been a little troubling to us, because we don't see that there's a problem with that. We're a very compassionate country for the most part, and we don't mind giving, at least through this period of time and in the 1800s. We don't mind helping out our fellow man. That's something that the church teaches us. So why would we, if we needed help, why would we have a problem with begging? But yet on other cultures, getting some kind of help or asking for help was something that was just totally foreign to them, that they would never do that type of thing. So depending on where you came from, like you said, is going to make a difference on how you approach, even if you ask for help or need help.
Okay, I'm going to jump in here real quick. Sorry to interrupt, but we've got some super chat stuff building up here. So from Dominica Zasanka, they sent in a donation to us before the live stream even started. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Blob Monster, I bought one of your cups and your bowl with the handle. Use them all the time. Love them. Ty Jordan sent in a donation, said, I made mushroom ketchup for the first time this week. Any recommendations for recipes with the dried byproducts? Stay safe in these odd times. Adam Solik says, still no sound. I think we got that fixed now. Speed and Style Tony, here is some money so we can get some sound. Thank you, Speed and Style Tony. That's great. And Logan C. Hope everyone is well. Townsends, sorry, I've been working all over the country due to the virus. I've missed these live feeds so much. Hope everyone stays safe. Thank you, John, for these live streams. They are always informative. And I saw him drop out of the chat before I got the chance to read that. So thank you so much, Logan C. Sir O'Connor sent something in. It says, money to personal plastic bubbles need you all. So, I don't know. We had a question or two in there if you want to check that out.
Mushroom powder. It's like super good to put on, anything you want to add a bunch of umami to, right? So, you can use it like salt. It's like a super, wonderful salt additive because it's got a lot of salt in it. And it brings along a whole bunch of other flavors. So anything you'd sprinkle a little salt on, boy, mushroom powder is going to do some amazing things with that. So, do we have any questions coming in through the chat that are about our subject today?
Well, we had some, but this has been, so far, I haven't paid much attention to the chat because this has been a job.
He's working hard.
So,
He's working hard.
But I will keep, if you guys have asked a question already, go ahead and throw it in there again. I'll keep an eye out for them. My first one is, how did older people that didn't have a family get taken care of if they were poor?
There we go.
So that's a question for you folks, Maggie and Parson.
Well, we're having a little trouble hearing you now.
Okay.
I see.
Yeah, your sound has gone down a little bit, but you said, how did people who were too old and didn't have family?
Right. So if there were some older folks and they were poor, who took care of them?
Well, those are the ones who were auctioned off. Generally, they were taken to the town meeting, and it was put out that there was that need, and people would bid in on them and be willing to take them and keep them for a period of time for so much money a week to help pay their expenses off. I see a lot of times where there are people who are old and infirmed, sometimes even bedridden, and people are asking for extra money. They've taken these people in and they need a little help. But it was also common for a neighbor to take you in, or someone that just knew you and felt sorry for you. And then after they take you in, then they apply to the poor relief and say, hey, you know, I'm taking care of this lady here. She needs some help, and I would like to have a little money back to help pay for her expenses. So that was real common too.
Yeah, so obviously it's almost like those individual towns. I mean, I think that the money that's coming to help support those things is actually coming right into the town. It's like town taxes, county taxes, whatever, that is immediately being turned around and relieving the poor. And it isn't sort of like it goes all the way up into some big government thing and then it gets filtered back down into a local situation. Can you hear me? So okay. Can you? There, I believe, I can't remember which book it was, but do you have a connection or a thought about the percentage of the actual budget of a town or whatever local government entity is being spent on poor relief?
Well, we know that the parishes in Virginia, up to 52% of their budget was being spent for the poor.
We had a question come in from the chat that said, who was considered poor? I mean, today we have the poverty line, and people on either side of that can be like, well, I don't really feel poor. I feel poor, and I'm well above that. So how was that established then?
Actually, it was established by the person themselves. When they became, and they called them destitute, was the terminology, not poor. A destitute person would, when they applied for relief, when they asked for help, then they were considered to be the town poor. As long as they could keep working or they were struggling to work, they were not in that level. You
didn't want to become dependent on the town, because that would have been a horrible situation to be in.
Yeah, it really gave up all your freedom. You had no more control over yourself.
What are we eating?
Yeah.
What's a poor person eating?
Well, by the time that you're getting to the point where they've decided that it's cheaper to put all of you in one place and have one overseer over you rather than farming you out to so many places, and they begin the constructions of the almshouses and the poorhouses. I've read their feeding through that period of time, and they're giving them to eat like a bowl of gruel in the morning, and for lunch they'll have like soup, like a vegetable soup, or perhaps on Sundays they'll get a small piece of meat with a little bit of vegetables and a piece of bread. And then for supper they're getting bread and butter, a piece of bread and butter, or bread and cheese. And that's what they're eating, because although they want to make sure that the needs are being met, they don't want to overfeed you, because they don't want you to get comfortable staying there if there's any possible way you can go on. So they tried to make it as uncomfortable as they could without being bad, because they were hoping, without being cruel, because they were hoping that people would do their best to stay out of it. That was the whole purpose of the poorhouses as they came along. So that's when you get that. I was talking about that change of attitude around 1750, 1760, and the poor go from being looked upon as pitiful as to being possible criminals or taking advantage of the system. And that whole attitude kind of flips around. You go from taking care of people out of compassion to taking care of people and hoping to reform them and to make them better than what they are. And you were talking about, John, about the attitude that changes and how different people look at it. And that's kind of what you see start coming around after 1760 or so.
Yeah, there's a good, interesting quantity of documentation, especially as you start to get into the early 19th century, sort of books that have to do with the regulation of caring for the poor, and they would show you, sort of the rations that everyone is supposed to get, the food that is, and they're a lot like soldier rations or sailor rations at the time period. It almost seem to be set up the same way. This day you're going to get that, and then on Tuesdays you get this. It's pretty interesting. And then there's even recommendations for clothing and the kinds of clothing that they're going to be given. But that seems to be after it becomes a bit more industrialized or mechanized. It seems like as we go through and we get into the 19th century, they're dealing with it much more of a let's make one system to fit it all.
Right. Well, it becomes a business after you get past the revolution. When you get around 1800 or so, it kind of turns into a sort of a business, and it's how efficiently can we run this, and how cheaply can we run this, and how much profit can we make off of it. We're really beginning to be worried about taking all of this money and pouring it in on these people and not getting any return for it. And so you see a lot of change happens right around 1800, 1810, right in through there.
So as reenactors and people who try to bring the story, bring the truth about the history into sort of a different interaction. I mean, there's with reenacting, people don't just sit there and give a lecture, right? They're bringing that to life in reenacting it. How do you approach that? What have you been doing with talking about that?
One of the things that you see once the poorhouses and workhouses come around is you see the fact that they are trying to keep the poor, these destitute people, industrialized. They want them occupied. They want them to do something industry-wise.
Idle hands and such.
Right, and so they begin to bring things in for you to do that hopefully you can turn around and the house can sell. So they have all kinds of lists. This starts actually earlier. You see this coming in 48, 50, right through there. And one of the things they have you doing is picking oakum. And that's probably the one that is the best known and goes on for a long period of time, almost up to the 1900s. And picking oakum was taking old rope from the ships or from the docks that's been worn out and pulling it apart. They cut it into 2-foot lengths, and then they pull it apart until just the fibers.
Individual fibers.
Yeah, into the individual fibers. And then once the oakum is picked like that, they would take it and roll it back up into long sausages, soak it in oil and tar, and use it to caulk the sides of the ships, or even in the chinking in the cabins or in the flooring. It had a lot of uses as something to plug like that. So I take out a basket full of rope and I pick oakum, and I just wait to see who's going to come by and ask me what I'm doing.
Our cabin's got a lot of gaps in it, so if you can send me some of that you get done with,
I can do it, sir. I've got a whole basket full.
All right, so I've got quite a few questions from the chat right here. Here's one: if you were poor, how did you how did you get goods? Was it just strictly the barter system?
Well, again, you're talking about the difference between someone who's destitute, who is on poor relief, and the poor, which would be someone who is still working on their own. There's a lot of jobs you could do on the streets that didn't require you to have to get goods. There are things that you could do to eke out a small little living, enough to be able to buy food and perhaps take care of yourself, a place to live, by going out and collecting them early in the morning and then selling them on the streets. So you have a lot of different options to do that type of thing. Once you're under poor relief, you don't get that option. You get to wear a P on your shoulder like this, and that's to show everybody that you're a pensioner, is what they called us, that you're on poor relief, and that someone is giving you tax money or giving you goods to help you survive. So there was a bit of a difference with that.
Okay. And then somebody asked, what type of veteran care for the poor veterans was there?
You see them begging on the streets like you do everyone else.
A lot of them have a sign that says, "I was wounded in battle."
Mm-hmm.
And
we do have there's the Chelsea I think it's the Chelsea pension in the United Kingdom, the Great Britain had at the time, a fund for sailors that were wounded, and they would get a pension from that. It was very small, and sometimes it was difficult to collect from. And then there was the pension that happened with Revolutionary War soldiers, where they were actually, given money at different times. Generally, it was Revolutionary War veterans, and they were giving testimonies in the early 19th century and getting pensions from that. They would kind of prove that they were that they were a soldier, and then they would get some, sometimes, very small, and it was very sort of arbitrary and sometimes difficult to prove, but there's a lot of information about that.
I don't think they came up with a place for them to live until further in the 1800s.
Right.
Is the first, here in the United States, the first place I've seen. But there may be one earlier that I don't know about.
There was a question in the chat about retraining programs for adults and trying to get them into jobs or industry.
Bettering houses, yes.
They're called bettering houses, which was another word for a workhouse. And it wasn't that they trained you to do anything. They put you to work, usually with oakum, picking and pounding oakum. And there were wonderful things written on the walls, like, God helps those who help themselves, and inspiring quotes for you to remember. And again, they would work you hard. They would work you at the most menial tasks that you could, and feed you only what was necessary, hoping that it would inspire you to want to get out and make something better of yourself. There wasn't necessarily a training program for, well, let's see if we can teach him to do something else. It was more of a, let's make you miserable so you don't want to do this anymore.
And then another question was, did the poor or the destitute, did they end up saying, forget this, I could be better off on my own, and they leave and they try to make it themselves?
Absolutely.
Well,
Absolutely.
But you also had people working the system, and that's what I maybe alluded to with the sign that said I was wounded in battle. If I wasn't a soldier, maybe I could get some pity by making people think that I was. But then also I might every fall my leg might start hurting pretty bad, and I'd go apply to be let into the poorhouse for the winter. And then lo and behold, here we are, spring, climb the fence, and we're gone. One of the men that took care of the poorhouse said something that he would climb the fence for a few pence.
There was it you, Carol, who gave me the book or pointed me to the book that had to do with the records, and there was, each person that came in and went out, and they talked about, how long they were there, and you want to speak to that? It's
a big book.
Great big. It's Boston. That was the Boston Poorhouse Records, the great big volumes.
Yeah.
And it goes through, and the fellow that did the writing, at least for part of the time, had a great sense of humor because of the way he would talk about who had come in. And you could tell by the way he talked that it was someone they had seen maybe several times.
They knew them all.
They knew them. And they would talk about when they came in, and that they'd come in destitute and nearly naked, and that they'd had to clothe them, and he would put down what they gave them. And then a few days later, he would say something to the effect of, well, there she went again and took the clothes of the lady next to her. We'll probably see her again in another month. So they were used to this kind of thing happening quite often.
Amazing. Amazing.
So there's another question that just came in that was really good. Could people be forced into the poorhouse, or did you choose to go in?
You could be forced into the poorhouse, yes. Generally, the overseers of the poor would go around in the town. They were the ones who were in charge. And if they were notified by your neighbor that you were destitute and not doing well, they would come to you and suggest that you allow them to take you in. If they could find a way to keep you out, they would prefer to keep you out. It was harder to get in than it was to stay out between the two things. But in particular, if you were a mother and your husband had left you and you were on the verge of destitution and you had children, then the overseers could come and take your children from you and insist that they be brought into the poorhouse, clothed and educated for a year, and then sold as an indentured servant or an apprentice to a trade, again, to better them, to hope that they would give them a better chance rather than them turning to criminal activity when they got older.
Okay.
What do you think? He's back to me. Wow.
Well, the Skype froze up on us for a second, but I think we're back on now. I've got
there we go.
I've got a bunch of stuff in Super Chat that we can cover real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
Christine Pearston sent in a donation, said hello from Medford, Massachusetts. Dominica Sasanka, I'm so happy to have you. Love you guys. Christopher Ramsey, happy Friday from Glastonbury, Connecticut.
Okay.
And thanks again for all you do. My Friday afternoon therapy. Stay healthy out there. Michael Howell, the recent videos have been amazing. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
And then Master Cool says, really like the topic today, learning about people usually forgotten in history and today.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Frank and Carol, what do you think about that idea of people, the stories not being told about the poor, and maybe even in some ways people even rejecting the idea? Oh, there weren't a lot of poor people. There weren't a lot of dirty. It was all middle class people in North America.
We look to important people for some of our documentation, people like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. And we read that when they were in Europe during the Revolutionary War, that they were asked, what about the poor people? Well, the countries they were visiting had terrible problems with the poor. And so they very confidently said, well, we don't have any poor. Everybody in Pennsylvania, for instance, has a job. And they're all very well taken care of, and they're all very happy. So now when we read that, we will immediately think, well, maybe there weren't any poor here.
Yeah, well, also you get some, especially de Warville and some other people that are traveling in the United States, and they tend to have very, very rosy glasses on as they're describing North America.
It's almost as though it's a bit of a PR move. That we're trying to show what a wonderful country this is, and that if you are poor or destitute or you're not good in the country where you're from, if you'll just come here, as soon as you step off the boat, your fortune is made. You're going to be fine.
Well, that's some of the PR for the indentured servants.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the same thing for me. In Ireland, that's what I was told, is this was a place that as soon as you're free, you're going to have everything that you need, and people will hand you stuff. That was the way that they were trying to get the immigrants to come and fill the country up. And in fact, you find that a lot of that was put to the side and hidden for a long time. In fact, it's not until about the 1960s that someone finally said there had to be poor people here, and they started looking into the poorhouse records and into the church records, and there they found everything that had been hidden all that time, put away so that it didn't look like we had those kind of people here,
So sorry.
Go on, Ryan.
A question that just popped in the chat that kind of comes along the same lines is, we know that alcohol or different substances were an issue with the general public. Was that even more so with the poor in the poorhouse?
Oh my, yes. Every single record, every poorhouse that I've looked at always mentions that is probably their number one problem is alcoholism. People that are addicted to drink, and they drink everything away. That and gambling. Gambling was a big problem, and they would gamble their clothes, they would gamble everything they've got, and they would end up having to be put in the poorhouse because they had nothing left, and they would dress them and feed them, and they'd sober a little bit, and then a lot of times they'd say they'd jump the fence and go back to the way they were, and we'll see them again in about a month, is what they would say. So yeah, it was a big problem.
This is off topic. We'll get back to the topic, but there are a lot of people in the chat asking if they can get your autograph on a DVD. And I know that we can't necessarily do that right now, but if we did another live stream with you guys and Skype, maybe we could have them, you pre-sign them and have a stock of that or something. Would you be willing to do that?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I'd be honored to do
Maggie
so.
will make her mark.
I'll make my mark on it. Yeah. I'll do that.
You ready? So I want Frank and Carol to hold on there a little bit. I want to talk about these Patreon folks that I've got here. And because I got to get to the second half of the list or, well, bad things will happen. So the other half of our Patreon folks, Elise Edson, BEB1214. I think he's like an android or something. Anyway, Michael Carroll, I think it is. Stephen Mazzaris. Teresa Mandrakia. Christina B. Lauren Karen. And we also have, wait, there's one more. I wrote it the other direction. Valerie Grasso, super thank you, Valerie. And there are some, we also have some Patreon folks, or some PayPal folks. So some people just want to, it's like, okay, here's just a one-time thing. The best way to do that is PayPal. And Elizabeth Kilmer, Jay Nevium, there we go. Denise Maloney-Piran, and Christopher Dreyer. All those folks
Thanks so much, guys.
Helped us out. A tremendous, huge quantity of people. Also, some folks help us out by purchasing things on our website. And we sell things to reenactors. We also sell things that have to do with the Nutmeg Tavern here, mugs or t-shirts or, aprons, whatever. Those things all, that way you kind of get a little thing and help us out making videos. And it's, we're going into a difficult season. We're not sure exactly what kind of, it's like, can we go to historic sites and do videos? No. And so we're kind of in a turmoil about how to bring you the best content. Even today with the weird technology thing that we're working on, all these things, I want to thank you for helping us out with those things.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in real quick with some more Super Chat stuff. We appreciate every single one of these that comes in, and I want to make sure to read them. Keltoid5 comes in and says, just wanted to say, great video on Wednesday. Thank you for your sanity and perspective. Cohen Jansens says, hi, Townsends, raising my boar mug to your health. Woo. Stay safe. Seems that 19th century was a bad century for the poor. In Belgium, there was a law that could send homeless to forced labor camps. Mm-hmm. And Marty McGill says, you've got me using nutmeg on everything. Who would have thought? Cheers. Thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you, all of you Super Chat folks. Frank and Carol, we can go back to you for a few minutes. Tell me about what you think is maybe the most humane of the dealing with poor people in the 18th century, and then maybe we can juxtapose that against what seems like the least.
But the most humane way that they dealt with the poor, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Everywhere I read, even though there was somewhat of a what can we do and how cheaply can we do it, I never read anywhere but that there wasn't a base compassion there. Every single place. People were doing it not because they had to do it or because it was the right thing to do, but it was because they genuinely felt that the poor needed to be helped. And when you find writings on it from the overseers or from the councilmen, the selectmen, they were called in the Northeast, a lot of times you find, I have some letters, and they're very sympathetic. This poor woman, see her into the house and make sure she has what she needs. There was compassion there, and there was always people who did this because of their own hearts. the men who were set as the overseers of the poor or the selectmen in the town who kind of ran, they were the ones you had to go through to even be able to get in there. A lot of times they would serve on that board for 25 or 30 years because they really cared about the poor people and they wanted to make sure that it was done right. So while the ideologically, forgive me, that was too big of a word for the afternoon. While the ideal was probably somewhat harsh in that we're going to try to make these people better, we're going to try to get them out of the poorhouse, I think the bottom line was always one of what can we do to make this person's life better? And that was kind of where it came from. And I think that was based out of compassion.
And sort of circling back to one topic that I touched on earlier, and that was that idea that the money that was given out to the poor was collected from the local community generally and just circled right back out to the poor. What about that topic of warning out, or, it's like, okay, does this poor person belong to this community?
Right. That was probably one of the bad fallouts that came from this whole poor situation, was that the communities began to close up upon themselves and they were not willing to have to pay for someone who wasn't of their community. If someone wandered in that was a vagrant or was a beggar, it was or a tramp, as the word was, who was tramping from one town to another trying to find work. They did not want to have to take care of those people because they weren't one of them.
Yeah, you're not from around here.
You're not from here. And it became difficult to be able to get into a town and set up residence. For some places, there was like a 3-year period that if you had not been there for 3 years and you fell on hard times, they just kicked you out.
One town warned out their own mayor because he had been there less than
3 years.
The minimum time.
So if you've decided you wanted to pick up John Townsend and your family and move to Waxhaw or to another place, you would have to literally be sponsored by somebody there, or you would have to go in and prove that you had enough money to take care of yourself for a period of time, because they would not accept someone that came in that could possibly have to show up on their poor list. And I think that was kind of bad for a while, depending on how it stopped movement. Unless you could get a sponsorship from someone in town that says, okay, I'll put up enough money that if John goes on poor relief, then my money will pay for him for the next 3 or 4 months. So you had that kind of thing happening, and you had people who were destitute who were just trying to move to another place to find work, and they had a very difficult time doing it because of this warning out.
Ryan that just moved to a new house, the town he's living in now could send a bill to the other town that he moved from and say, we have one of your poor people and you owe us.
I'm sure they have. Yeah, absolutely.
I would warn him out. Frank and Carol, can you give me, reintroduce yourself real quick before we close up? Tell us about yourselves and what you do.
Yeah, this is take 3 on the introduction here.
Yeah.
But we are Frank and Carol Jarbo. We live down below Bowling Green, Kentucky, close to the Tennessee line. And we are Parson John Living History Incorporated, which is a nonprofit we formed in about 2008, 2009. And we travel about 42, 43 weekends out of the year to living history events. And we put on these clothes or others. We have several personas that we do so we can hopefully bring history to life for the people that come. And not just for the public that come, but we like to share amongst the reenactors. We're a wonderful community. And right now we're a community that's sorely separated and hurting very much. So we're looking forward to whenever that first event is going to be that we can get back to. But this is what we do, and this is who we are.
Thank you, Frank and Carol, and I'm sure we will touch base with you back sometime in the next few weeks. So thank you so much for bearing with us today, all that technology. Thanks.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for asking us.
Take care, guys.
Okay. Are we back? We're back. Oh, ooh, boy. Thank you, Frank and Carol. Anyway, it has been a tremendous week. And what do you need, Ryan?
I'm going to interrupt you for some super chats.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me see here. Where's the last one? Okay. Denise Maloney Pyron says, I just got here. I'll have to watch.
There she is.
It is posted.
There she is. She's right there.
Okay, cool. Nancy Gross sent in a donation. Thank you very much. Ord's Board. Found your cheese video, so subbed. Love the channel. Thank you so much.
Yeah, welcome to the channel.
And then Sue O'Connor, with the sweet little old person fostered by their community, or would it be the poorhouse? Do you have any information on that,
probably.
John?
I mean, it depends on the time and the place, but both of those things are happening. I think a lot of times that would be, we're going to find a house, a place for them to stay. So, let me tell you, been just an intense week. And it's just getting more intense. I don't know what to tell you, but we're going to do our utmost to continue to bring wonderful stuff to YouTube whenever we can. Well, at least I hope you think it's wonderful. And I want to thank you guys for coming into this live stream, sharing the chat and everybody that's there, the community that we can have here in the Nutmeg Tavern. And I want to thank Ryan for putting up with all this technology craziness.
It's been fun. Thanks, guys, for being patient with me.
Right. And I hope you have a tremendous week. Thanks for watching.